Rosalia is this singer, performer, this atypical pop star who is being defined as an atypical pop star because she doesn't fit the mold neatly. And she's progressing into domains and territories of musicality because she's been incredibly inventive and is just sort of pioneering the space in a way that is opening up possibilities when it comes to music. And her path, from an external point of view, looks as though it has an incredible amount of creative freedom. And it also looks as though she has always had that amount of creative freedom. However, this isn't the case and this isn't true. Rosalia had to go through a really extreme period of learning and focus and perseverance. And she did a lot of her foundational learning in tradition, which makes it all the more fascinating. How can someone that has so much creative freedom now have really built their path on the foundations of this traditional landscape, which historically, especially over the past 20, 30 years, there are so many different creative people that are pushing tradition to the side. They're saying you don't need it. They're saying that you can just educate yourself online. And yet here we have an example of someone whereby pursuing tradition, they found creative freedom. And in this video, I want to talk about it. I want to explain what's going on, the dynamic of Rosalia's path and how she found it. And if you don't know who I am, my name is Joe Yuli. I'm a philosopher. I am absolutely obsessed with vocations and callings, understanding them, mapping them. And it's one of the reasons I run, and we're actually running a summer holiday school at the moment, which is walking people through the step of choosing the right career path with this deep sense of conviction by unearthing their very own career archetype so they can know what their calling and their life's work is. And they can go in that direction and get going and moving along their path. And as someone that is deeply obsessed about vocations, finding out about Rosalia opened me up to exploring this domain of tradition through another lens and really getting to grips with the different ways in which a path can unfold and also can be forged. Now, in the world, many different paths that we are given access to are often dominated by a singular way of doing the path. So say, for example, you are creative, there might be the opening of becoming a marketer or a brand designer. There might be the path of being a graphic designer. There are specific openings that our culture allows people to walk through without too much friction. And then there are all these other pathways that are very hidden. They're also filled with hardship, but also adventure. And also, if we end up going there, we end up entering a space that we're meant to be in, typically because the vocation is all about the path that we haven't walked, or at least culture hasn't walked yet, and we are the first person to walk it. And also, our path is an untrodden path, meaning we're the first person to walk that path. Now, when it comes to Rosalia, walking a traditional path, she went to university for 9+ years. She studied under a mentor for basically that period and other mentors along the way. Many artists, many musicians, they get lost to the constraints of these traditional frameworks, paradigms, structures. Not all, but many. And yet Rosalia shows us a different way. Now, one of the interesting things that we've got to think about here is, what is tradition? Now, when we bring up tradition, we're often thinking in past tense. We're thinking backwards. We're very much reflecting on what has happened. And when people walk tradition, they're often re-embodying something that has already been done, something that has already happened. That's why to honor tradition, you need to bring up the old ways, norms, different expressions of values, often as close to the original as possible. So you're in many ways copying and mimicking what has come before in order to honor and preserve what has come before. And that's one way to honor tradition. And I think that that's a really potent and beautiful way to honor tradition. However, in saying that, there is an alternative way to honor tradition, a way that I think Rosalia's path properly expresses, and not only shows us how to get to creative freedom in a different way, but also shows us how to honor tradition without purely being in the sense of anti-tradition or rebellion against what has been done in service for what can be done. And what this means is that she doesn't view tradition as having these predefined outcomes. She views tradition as this springboard of possibilities, a place to gain and gather inspiration from. And so she still pays homage to the tradition. She studied it. She gave 9 years of her life to really understanding it at its fundamental core level. But she does not see tradition as the ceiling or the restraint or all that it can be. She starts to reimagine it, and she starts to ask, how can I go further? How can I take this further? And she also doesn't limit herself to the bounds of the tradition all by itself. She allows other inspirations, she allows other experiences in her life to influence how she ends up walking her path. And one of the very first sort of potent lessons that I noticed in really understanding and researching Rosalia's path is that she has this very clear intention, and she studies with intention. And a lot of people don't study with this type of intention. And there's this sense of intensity behind it. There's a reason for it. She has conviction in what she's studying. And you'll notice that oftentimes in culture, when people are talking about whether someone should study in university or they should go and start their own business, right? There's sort of this landscape of different opinions around different paths. Not too long ago, the major opinion and the dominating one, this was 30 years ago, recent history, whereby we were sort of told, instructed, educated on the necessity of going and getting yourself educated and then going and getting a job. And by doing that, you will have a secured future. And as that image started to dissolve because people that were interacting with it didn't find that it was true, then the pendulum swung. And so you can imagine an image of this swing going to the other side, whereby the truth is in the middle and there's a swing past it, and it goes towards people that are now spouting the opinion that traditional education is a sham, don't believe in it. If you go there, you're going to lose all your money, you're going to go into debt. Instead, what you should do is you should probably educate yourself online, start your own business. And so there's a big swing across to another way of walking one's path. Now, a lot of this is influenced by the economic factor, by how much one can make money. However, if we start to investigate learning through the lens of vocation, your sacred calling, this isn't about finding the profession and studying the profession that is going to give you the most access to economic prosperity. This is about deeply learning your craft, really doing it properly. And with this in mind, suddenly traditional education or non-traditional education is dependent on the individual. It's dependent on you and your path. And so this is something that Rosalia deeply understood. She wasn't looking at traditional education and studying at university for 9+ years through this lens of, is this going to make me lots of money? Or she wasn't going to university to try to figure things out. she was there with the intention of learning her trade. She wasn't even there to become a traditional flamenco singer. I think it's pronounced cantora. Now, if anybody knows Spanish and they know what the exact pronunciation is, please put it in the comment section below. But she went in trying to learn her trade, which was singing. And she understood that learning flamenco and the art of flamenco would help her to have a strong foundation at the very base of her path. And by having that strong foundation, she would then be able to go into whole new terrains. And so she wasn't seeing university as this endpoint. She was seeing it as an entry point. She even says in a couple of her interviews that she was seeing this university thing as a way to get in the door to the industry. She didn't know anyone, she had no contacts. So what is available to her? Okay, this traditional path seems to be the most accessible. And so that's what she ended up doing. And so she went a very traditional path, which ended up setting her up later on for future opportunities to continue to go further. The other thing that Rosalia does incredibly well and allows for her creative freedom, and something that she ended up learning by going through the traditional education system, as well as constantly connecting and returning to herself through the process, was that she realized she can blend her interests. And so when a vocation, this is your sacred calling, requires self-expression, no singular interest is ever going to totally be able to contain all that you're wanting to express. But you can, especially over time, learn to weave in different interests that allow for proper expression. These different interests that will give more facets of who you are, the ability to be communicated and transmitted to other people. Because every single interest, subject, even certain inspirations, they have boundaries. And when you're trying to get across or transmit particular ideas, transmit particular forms of creativity, right, there are going to be certain boundaries around that. And when you're trying to go beyond these boundaries, these categories are going to have to break down or dissolve or sometimes, be smashed through. And so Rosalia understood that by going through this traditional education, learning flamenco, she would have a foundational inspiration. She even says in different interviews that this flamenco and learning it, that's her foundational and her biggest inspiration. But it's not the only inspiration. There are many different inspirations, and there's many different things that she's still exploring as an individual that need to be expressed, that need to come out of her. And she can't do it purely in the domain of flamenco. Even in her traditional studying, she was studying arias, which is this sort of it's like monologue song that's sung in opera. And one of the reasons that she was learning how to do this was because she was learning her trade of being a singer, and she wanted to be able to hear her voice, meaning that her voice, right, was trying to come out of her, and she was learning all these different skills and these different crafts, and through these different domains, so many different approaches to this, so that eventually she'd be able to put it all together, blend them all, and then her voice would appear. I remember watching a time lapse of Dali, and it's something that I tell our students that are inside of our Career Archetypes community to do all the time, because it reveals how artists can often appear over time. And that is to watch this time lapse of Dali from the beginning to the end of his life. And Salvador Dali is a painter, and he's very much involved in the Surrealist movement, probably the most famous Surrealist painter as well. And if you watch the time lapse, you see in the beginning that he's using very traditional forms. You can sort of point at them and say, okay, this is from this period, this is from this period. And then all of a sudden, his style appears. It's him, and there's no one else like him, and there he is. But he went through all these different forms in order to finally arrive at what is completely his own expression. And we see this type of thing happening again with Rosali, and she found her way through the traditional education system that allowed her to arrive at that site. And another point on this is that when you're blending inspirations, it often becomes a necessity for your own self-expression. And a subject, a symbol, a moment in time, a memory, a person that you've interacted with, right? All these different things, when combined, might create the container to properly express that which is trying to be expressed. Or in other words, the thing that you're wanting to create needs a bunch of different things to come in union with each other in order for that thing to be put into the world. And if you want an example of this, we can use Rosalia's album cover, Motomami. And this, just the title alone is already a combination and union. Moto meaning strength and mami meaning vulnerability. This is something that she mentioned when she was going through these different interviews. And there's one element of union, but if you look at the cover as well, you'll see a naked woman with a helmet on. The helmet is slightly open. There's her hair at the back, and the outlines sort of look like wings. And then there is the spray painted red on the front. And all of these images, we can sort of connect to different inspirations. I mean, straight away, the colors have echoes of the Spanish landscape, Spanish feel for passion. It also has this sense of being drawn back to the era of matadors and their capes and them moving the bulls. If you look at some of the imagery of the words in Motomami, you can sort of see, or you can make out, depends on how you want to interpret it, you can make out these like a bull or horns. We also get these sort of feelings of angels or wings, and this is actually a theme that came out of, or at least it was sort of first planted in the public space in her very first album, which is Los Angeles. And then she mentioned that if you looked at it through the Spanish lens, we can also talk about it as the angels. But we again see these wings in her cover album that sort of push this idea of the angelic or this goddess expression, which is another theme in her work, which is female empowerment. It sort of reminded me, honestly, of Nyx, the goddess. This is the ancient Greek goddess flying across the night sky. And we also have this theme of motorbikes and this lens of Tokyo neon night culture going on and motorbikes. And one of Rosalia's influences on that as well was these women on Instagram that would ride motorbikes around, and she just thought that was fucking cool. And she was into that, and that gave her that sense of being inspired and people being fearless. And so you can see all these different influences, right, coming together in order to properly contain that which she's seeking to express, that which she's seeking to place into the world, and to only be allowed to do that through flamenco means to not be able to properly self-express. And self-expression, the sense of connecting it as well with her freedom, is so important when it comes to a vocation that requires it. And to not have that would mean to dismiss the very calling that she needs to pursue in the world. So in other words, it wasn't simply about choosing one interest and then trying to put all of her self-expression within that box. Instead, it was about finding the right complementary inspirations, bringing them together in synthesis, in union, in a way that would allow her to express that which she is trying to express at its highest level. Now, another really potent lesson that Rosalia teaches us when it comes to walking your vocation is that repetition, it's a sin, and experimentation is the way to heaven. And there is this sort of idea, you would have come across it in social media land, be consistent, consistent, consistent. It's all about doing the same thing again and again and again and again and again. But Rosalia takes a very different viewpoint on this. And the sense of being repetitive and doing the same thing again and again and again, when it comes to someone being incredibly creative, is actually going to diminish what it is that they're trying to do. Now, one of the reasons that people get pulled into repetition is because they're seeking certainty. And if you've ever read Nietzsche's Human or Too Human, you would know very well that humans, they crave certainty, they crave the known, even to the point whereby if you place them in uncertain terrain, they'd rather hold on to false truths than to hold on to nothing at all. Right? So people grasp onto these anchor points, these ideas, these beliefs, they hold on to them tightly. And repetition appears as one of those sort of like consequences of dealing with the uncertain and dealing with things that we can't properly control. Now, when it comes to us walking our own path, we might have creative bursts and jump into these spaces of, okay, I'm doing this for the first time, but over a while, we then seek to stabilize it, even to the point sometimes where people will seek cycles of destruction because they're wanting consistency in seeing their world being destroyed again and again and again. And this gets into deeper waters of psychological recurring events that are unconscious and haven't really been looked at or explored and are causing these repeating patterns to happen. However, if we are in a frame of walking our vocation, walking a path that nobody else has walked before, we have to, at many points along the path, experiment, because doing the same thing again and again and again, it's not going to get here. And like I mentioned, Rosali really started to understand this. She understood that experimentation is how you can find new terrain and enter spaces that you need to be in, even though you've never been there before. Trying things out, testing things out, playing with things that don't naturally go together. I watched sort of one video where she was talking about how she tried to bring certain elements of, I think it was a reggaeton, together with flamenco, and her producer was listening to it like, this is not going to work. And she's like, just try it, and it ends up being amazing. And he said to her later on, I was wrong, I didn't think that was going to work. But she was able to bring these two things together through experimentation and through play. And so in that idea, we had tradition merging with another tradition, creating something new. But we also had this sense of willingness to explore things that don't seem to go together. But when they do, suddenly you're in a whole new space. And the other interesting thing that happens with Rosali is that she has a mentor. Now, I can't remember the full name, but his middle name or his nickname is El Chique. And this mentor, he's got a reputation of his own. He had won different competitions, had performed with other stars in the Spanish landscape. But the really interesting thing on his path was that as he was pursuing his performance and learning deeply flamenco, he decided he was going to teach it within a university setting. Now, this caused some frustrations and some people saying this was wrong because the flamenco tradition had been passed down orally, but he understood that he wanted to transmit this to more people, and he felt that a university setting was the right place to do it. So he was one of the early pioneers within this university setting, being able to teach others. And he goes ahead and starts to teach Rosali. And so we already have a mentor, which is a very traditional thing to have, right? It's a mentor, it's a teacher that is going to show you how to learn in a particular space, primarily the very fundamentals of your craft. And he himself is experimenting on his path. He's going from an oral tradition into a university setting, and you can see that his influence over her is incredibly dramatic. Right? It's said that he's quite a hard ass, right? You're not doing that right. You're not doing that right. Do it again. Where's the intention? Where's the energy? That movement's wrong. That movement's wrong, right? And she just thrived in that environment. But he was experimenting as well. He was taking a path that not many people had taken before. And he was able to transfer this idea of experimentation being a requirement for the path, imbuing it into her, and she then carries it forward. I mean, we don't really have someone who creates the album Los Angeles where she completely strips down flamenco to its core and takes the percussion out, which is such a big thing, and just leaves it so raw, her voice, the guitar. And by doing that, right, by exploring flamenco in that way, experimenting with it, she arrives in a whole new place. She arrives in a space where she's gotten closer to what her sacred calling actually is. Now, the very final potent lesson that Rosalia really left us with, at least when I was studying her path, is that if you want to be free, you need to subvert your audience's expectations. Now, in the modern world, many people have followers, subscribers, they get likes from audiences, clients, customers, bosses at work, right? There are these different influences that can push us towards a very particular way of working. And if we're not sensitive to these influences, what can happen is that the very things we create, we can think about creating a mirror, the creator's reflection isn't even in that mirror, meaning that your own unique expression isn't even in your work because you're so busy catering for other people's expectations, what they want, how they want it. They say that you should do it like this. And if you're constantly doing that, you can lose the essence of the creative work that you're meant to be doing. And many different people that create, right? This isn't just about a musician. This is about anybody that has to deal with giving of any kind of work, any kind of service to other people or dealing with other people, that they can have such a dramatic impact on the work that if you're not keeping in tune with it, you can lose yourself to it. And dealing with staying stable at the core is something that a lot of people haven't had much experience in, and so therefore they end up losing themselves to audiences and to subscribers and to followings and all this kind of thing. Now, when it comes to freedom and having creative freedom, you need to not always adhere to others. The sort of mantra that is made famous by consumerist America is that the customer is always right. And Rosalia tells us, no, it's not true. Actually, what is correct is her creative instinct and impulse and holding on and maintaining that vision. Now, to give you an example of how she maintained creative freedom, even whilst putting out multiple different albums, you'll notice in the 3 albums that she's put into the world, each one is different. And each one has a way of speaking and communicating that is true to her, but it is also experimenting and explorative. So in Los Angeles, we had the stripped down version of flamenco, and there was this theme of exploring grief. In the second album, we had this bringing together of these different musical art forms. I mentioned flamenco merging with reggaeton, flamenco merging with electro, right? She was really trying to understand what can flamenco be and where can I take it to, which is very different from the first album, which was really getting to like the roots of it. Then in her third album, we had Motomami, and we had this very playful shift into this inspiring, fearless, this attitude. again, changing expectations. I mean, there's a big motorcycle influence going on. Now, if you go onto these different forums that are speaking about what's to be expected with Rosalia, there's diverse opinion, right? Some people are saying, well, maybe her next album is going to be influenced by Brazilian music. Other people are saying maybe it's more melancholic, maybe Lana Del Rey appears, right? There's all this speculation. But one thing is for sure, and that is that her audience, the people that are supporting her as she's putting her work into the world, they're incredibly excited, but they have no expectation on her. So Rosalia right now has complete creative freedom to do whatever she wants, and her audience expects to be surprised. They expect to not know what she's going to do next. Now, in the world of, just everyday people creating stuff online, starting online businesses, the opposite is how people act. It's very much, I need to stay consistent. I need to, say this thing that if I change, then everyone is going to get freaked out. And Rosalia shows us something different. She says you can have creative freedom, but you have to embed it into the work. And also, by consequence, in who you are. One of her biggest desires goes throughout the entire path is freedom. Everything she does is about freedom. How can I get more freedom? How can I be around people that are free? How can I create in a free way? It's all about freedom. Which is why she's able to gain creative freedom, even when she was going through traditional schooling. How can I use this to get freedom? And many of us do not allow freedom into the work at the foundational level, and therefore we don't get it, and yet we yearn for it, we desire it, we want it. We don't get it because it's not in the path, it's not in our expressions, it's not in our work. And this is what Rosalia tells us. You need to have creative freedom, freedom in general, in the very fabric of what it is that you're doing if you are to receive it. And so if that means subverting the expectations of audiences and followers and customers and clients, then you do it. But eventually, they begin to understand that they should expect the unexpected, giving you room to properly express yourself. Now, in hearing all of this, I want to give you some questions to ask yourself so that you can understand how to get creative freedom in your own life. And you can also begin to understand your relationship with tradition and how it can help you or hinder you on your own personal path. So the first question is, do you see tradition more as a ceiling that restricts your work or as a springboard of possibilities? Second question, are you studying with vocational intention, right, for your calling, or educating yourself for economic opportunity, social status, or job security? Question 3, where are you playing it safe in your work, and what are you afraid will happen if you change? And question 4, how might you blend some of your interests or passions that don't seem to fit into your work in an undetected way that elevates the work? And that question is all about bringing those interests into your work in a way that can help you walk your path. Now, Rosalia's path tells us about two really important vocational truths. And the first one is that tradition, and particular traditions, can act as foundational inspirations that can take us further. They're not simply there to hinder us or constrain us, but they can actually be used as a springboard of possibilities into whole new domains, opening up doorways, opening up pathways. Now, the second truth that Rosalia's path presents us with is that we are responsible for our own creative freedom. Now, we can say, well, the education system it made me this way, and if it wasn't for them, then I would be free. But we have the opportunity to have creative freedom wherever we are. And it's about us showing up, having that deep intention that what we are going to be finding, using, learning can take us to where it is we're wanting to ultimately go. So no matter what we're studying, no matter the situations that we've found ourselves in that may have felt, incredibly restrictive, we can use all that and still gain creative freedom in our lives and in our work. And so we must be experimental in our path and have this real willingness to give up what we have for what we can possibly have in order to do our sacred work. Now, if you are interested in learning more about how I help people to come to know what their calling is and what their life's work is all about, then you'll want to go ahead and check out our summer school. So we've just started our summer school that helps anyone who doesn't know which career path to choose, what their direction is. Maybe you've got multiple different interests. We help them to figure out what it is. And we do this by unearthing your career archetype. And so students go through 8 weeks where they go through this process via a course that shows them how to connect in with their very own personal career archetype. And there are hundreds of career archetypes, so it's not a personality test that gives you 12 or 16 types. There are hundreds of different ones. We have members inside of our community unearthing new career archetypes every single day. And it's all about getting to the very core of what your calling in this life is, being able to embody that, and then walk the steps so that you can live that out in the modern world in the 21st century. Now, when it comes to the summer school, we have weekly live Q&A sessions where I'm jumping on there with members every single week. We're answering questions and talking about the different weeks that people are going through. We also have silent body doubling study sessions whereby you can come on, you can study course material alongside other people. And inside of our community, we have really just people sharing what they're going through, people asking questions about particular aspects of how to come into an awareness of their calling. And if that's of interest to you, then you can go ahead and check out the link below. And something else I should probably mention is that not only do we show people how to unearth their very own career archetype, but we also map the steps so that you can walk it with conviction, especially in the beginning stages when it can be so treacherous. So if you're interested in that, check out the link below.